thank you for being here this morning as we open up God's Word and try to grow closer to Him. Before we do that, though, let's go to God in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for this wonderful day that you've given to us. Thank you for asking us and commanding us to meet together on the first day of the week. And I'm so thankful for so many who choose to do that, to choose to begin their week showing their love for you, wanting to grow closer to you. I'm thankful. Dear Father, please bless us this morning as we come together to look at your word. Please help us to gain knowledge of you, to gain wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that we'll know how you want us to live, so that we can be faithful to you. I pray that you give us the courage to do that. So many times Satan comes up to us and causes us to question that and make excuses of why we shouldn't. And we're sorry for that. And we hope that you'll forgive us. But please help us to have the courage to live the way you've asked us to live, and do that boldly and wear your name proudly. Dear Father, help us in all that we do to glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. We're still in Romans chapter 1. At the end of last week, somebody came up to me and said, hey, can we slow down just a little bit and kind of go back through some things? You know, I didn't kind of know how I was going to go through the book of Romans because, we could stay in Romans for a while because there's so much depth. There's so many things to go through. So I thought, maybe I'll break it into the first 8 chapters over the first 13 weeks and then do the next 8 chapters in the next quarter, in the next 13 weeks. But, I think that person was right. I think we just need to slow down a little bit, so that we can truly see who God wants us to be. So we're going to go back over a little bit of what we talked about last week and kind of break some of that down before we move forward. So last week, in verses 24 and 25, it said, therefore God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. It just starts out by talking about how God allowed people to follow their heart. Have you ever stopped to think about why you struggle with sin so much? Isn't it because when we seek after something, we just wind up finding it? If we keep letting it be in front of us, we keep letting and not turn away from it and try to push it away from our lives, to try to run from it, and we just allow it to sit right there, we keep kind of seeking after it. All of a sudden, we find ourselves in the middle of it, don't we? We also find ourselves justifying it. And what does it say right here? God, at some point in time, as much as He's trying to give you that way out, He wants you to see. And honestly, as I look back through the sin in my life, I see that God always gave me a way out, and I didn't take it because I kept going after. I kept getting a little closer until finally I just fell into it. We have choices to make. And sometimes we're even in the middle of sin, and God's still trying to pull us back out. But, there gets to that point, it's kind of like I kind of refuse. God, I kind of like it. This is good. And I stay there. And He says, at some point in time, God's going to just cut ties and say, if that's what you want, it's your choice. I've tried to help you. I've tried to draw you back. I want you to be my child, and I will still always be here. But for the moment, until you choose something otherwise, I'm going to let you keep going because it's your choice. And that's what Paul is reminding the people here, because they've exchanged the truth about God for a lie because of fleshly desires that they wanted to give into, pride of life that they wanted to give into, the selfishness. And we need to pay attention, because that's a warning from Paul, as he was also warning the church at Rome. He says, for this reason, God gave them up to the dishonorable passions. For the women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men, and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. We talked last week that this is talking about homosexuality. That's what it's talking about. Do you know that as they worshiped the pagan gods, this was just rampant? This was something that was common. But notice what it says there. It says it's contrary to nature. What does that mean? What message is Paul giving us from God right there? It's unnatural. Scientists have proven there is no gene within us that causes us to be attracted to the same sex. God did not design us to be this way. It goes against all nature and what's natural for us as humans. He says, so don't buy into it. Just because it's common in front of you, just because other people are doing it, doesn't mean that it's okay. And this is one of the points where I want us to slow down a little bit, because I am so fearful in the next 10 years what we're going to see in the Lord's church. Why do you think I feel that way? All right? In the world overall, it's just going that way, isn't it?
The church always has to deal with, we're all of the world, we live in the world. It's hard to live in the world, not be of the world. That's difficult for all of us.
It is difficult because we're still in the world. But do you realize, as the world has changed so much, and now America we live in, it's just kind of accepted. Well, if you're homosexual, okay. Some of y'all will remember this. It was unheard of to watch TV and to see a homosexual in any type of an ad, any type of a show. It was unheard of unless it was something to let everybody know that's shameful, that's wrong. But think about how much it's changed. Think about how much TV has changed, just basic cable TV. Do you remember growing up where there was never a cuss word on TV? And then all of a sudden they started allowing, I think there was 2 of them that they would allow. Well, now you turn on something and it's just kind of rampant, isn't it? It's just all over the place. You almost can't watch a show without there being some type of language in it. What about sexual scenes? Oh, growing up, the parents even slept in separate beds in TV. We can't have that. We can't have them sleeping in the same bed. To now, what do you see on TV? Go ahead. Do what? Bunch of them in the bed. All kind of things happening that shouldn't be happening. Awful. But there's so many things that's changed, but do you see how easy it is for our kids now to now just have it so much in front of them? And it's not just TV. I mean, you can use the internet. You can use anything you want to find, you can find. And it's almost like it's just common now. Yes, ma'am. And isn't it funny how the vote for so long with the Presbyterians, the Baptist Convention, the whatever, how for so long it was, God, guys, we don't do this. And they would take a vote, and there would always be a few more who voted on the side of maybe we should. How is it that God's law changed to where all of a sudden it made it okay? Where now they say, you know what, it's okay that you can have a homosexual priest. You can have a homosexual preacher. You can have a homosexual who's a faithful Christian. They changed God's law. They changed the standard. Why? Because it's been in the world and it's kind of shoved down our throat. This is the scary part to me. Because I've talked to people from Freed Hardeman, Harding, Faulkner, any type of Church of Christ school. Do you know how many people that are students that attend there that tell other students, hey, I'm homosexual? Or if not, maybe they say, I'm bisexual. I'm telling you, it's coming our way. That's right. Because we believe that we're in trouble if we don't. But who are we in trouble with? The world. Who should we only care about? God. And honestly, I'm speaking that to myself as much as I'm speaking it to you. I've really got to change who I am and who I'm trying to please. Because I tell myself all the time, yeah, but people aren't going to let me do this, or I'm going to lose my job if, and who am I trying to please? And understand, I don't think we need to be unwise about it. I don't think at the football game Friday night, we all just jump out there in the middle on the 50-yard line and start talking about homosexuality. That's not the way to do it. But the thing is, if we don't stand up in individual cases and start pulling people aside and try to teach them a better way, yeah, we're wrong. Because there's souls at stake. And the thing that we're missing here is it's your children, your grandchildren's souls that's going to be at stake. My daughter's at Freed Hardman right now, and she's hearing this. And I got it from my oldest daughter probably the most, and it wasn't the fact that people were saying it. It was the fact that there were more and more people saying you shouldn't say anything to them about it. Do you not see that they love God? That's the scary part about it. Now, understand, that was not the teachers. That's not the administration. Freed Hardman stands very soundly on the scriptures, and they stand up against homosexuality. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about the kids' point of view. The kids who are now finally out of their house. And this is the pressure they're feeling.
My question to your Freed Hardman, what are you going to do about administration? They're not going to do anything about it.
I will tell you that they are doing more and more about it. Yes, but if they don't, you're right.
They're afraid if they do, the government could shut the school down.
Yes.
That's where we're at. And one thing I want to mention that thing I read is that what's really that we talk about. He opens up the slavery. We're a slave of Jesus several times in the epistle, and we kind of frown on that, but we also understand what that is. But this guy says what's more dangerous is being a slave to sin. And I think that's what we're talking about, because we think of a slave to sin as someone that's an alcoholic or a drug. Well, that's part of it, because it's an addiction. But so are these other things. And I think we don't look at it like that. But our country's become slave to sin because it rules us. And that's what the slave does. You get ruled by something. So we're ruled by it so hard. At what point do we tell our children? Sometimes I think we may be way too late, because other people get to them first.
Yes.
Still, first and second graders, guess what? They're getting this thrown in already. So
We really do have to start laying that foundation for what God not only expects, but what He says. Because the more they're swayed a certain way, all of a sudden that tolerance changes. Tolerance and then acceptance. And if we don't do things to start standing up, we're going to mess up. I will tell you that Freed Hardman is just like the church today. The church has done very little over the years. But I will tell you, there was a sports team at Freed Hardman this past year that lost most of its players because they were homosexual, and all of a sudden now they didn't feel comfortable being there any longer. Good job, Freed Hardman. Because at least now somebody has spoken up to say, this isn't okay. And so, yeah, they may not be taking all the steps that we want them to take, just like we as a church aren't taking probably all the steps we need to take. But hopefully we're all getting closer to trying to change that expectation, getting them back to God's expectation all the time. Yes, ma'am.
It's in the local school system. People may not realize here, but if the student changes their name, legal name, we're not allowed to call them by their former name. We have to call them by their new name, whether it be what they actually are or if they're not legalized.
So the way to... Go ahead.
More than Freed Hardman, more than the church, as individuals, what we do.
Yeah.
And here's the fault of mine. I'm too direct. But if we're afraid of offending people, we will not be honest.
Yeah.
And if you're honest, you're going to offend some people, and we got to be willing to live with that. But the majority of people are not. They're worried about how it's going to affect something else in their life. And I realize
or we want to sugarcoat it enough to make it okay, even though we still want to stand. And that's wrong, because we've changed. We convinced them by sugarcoating it that it's going to be okay. Last Sunday, when we talked about persecution, we also talked about how Jesus was persecuted. So really, at the end of the day, who are we following? Are we saying, hey, I'm going to call myself a Christian as long as I don't have to face any hardships? I will choose to do the right thing, but really I'm not going to share any expectations with anybody else because I'm afraid. I may lose my job. Now, understand, if a kid has their name legally changed, it doesn't mean we should go and try to shame a kid. But how are we going to try to save souls? That's the other part of the equation. It's not just a simple fact that we need to make a stand, because sometimes when we say make a stand, it's almost like we're pointing fingers and saying, shame on you and how could you? That's not what Jesus did. Jesus tried to change souls. Now understand, he did do that sometimes, didn't he? But wasn't that the people who knew the Word of God? The Pharisees? The Sadducees? He said, you bunch of hypocrites. You know better and you're doing it. We're talking about people who probably have no idea, don't know any better. And we should be over there like those prostitutes that Jesus talked to, those tax collectors that were cheating people. All kind of people, and he would pull them aside for a conversation to say, let me show you a better way.
I'm sure, kind of like with Brian's point, but for me, when my dad, especially when I got up to where I was somewhat a young adult, up to adulthood, anytime he corrected me, it didn't set good originally. And so, but once I got beyond that, he's saying I'm wrong, and thought about what he said, then I'm motivated to make a change. But had I not ever been really faced with a straight up, that's not right, or I probably would not consider the kid going that direction. So to Brandon's point, sometimes you have to sting someone, whether it's me or any of us in the church, to make us think, well, I need to think about it. It may not be till next week or next month or next year, but our souls are worth that. Okay? We've got to love people enough to be able to hurt them like we do our children. Who likes spanking their children? What do we do it for? To make a change in their life.
And so much of it is trying to figure out how to go about that, because at the end of the day, all we care about is change of behavior, change in their hearts. And if that means being harsh sometimes, I think it's wise to do. Because honestly, you're going to be faced with a situation and somebody's going to say, do you think homosexuals are going to hell? The answer should be most definitely. And that's not my decision, it's God's. But let me also tell you that I care deeply about those who are living in sin, because I want to help them out of it. How does that all of a sudden change that conversation? Because they need to know for sure 100% what God's law says and what you stand on. But the other side, if they don't hear the other side, that you care and that you want to help people get to heaven, then all you did was become somebody who is harsh, and they just built a wall and say, I really don't want anything to do with you. We've got to figure out a way to let people know at the end of the day, we want you to be just as much of the part of the Lord's church as all these other Christians are. But you got to do it God's way. And we can't send mixed messages in the middle of that. Questions or comments?
I think we realize how much the seed is being planted in our schools for children to explore their sexuality. They're not thinking they're homosexuality, they're just, teachers are giving them information to look it off.
I will say that I feel pretty confident that here in Summertown, that most teachers don't feel that way. Now, do they address it at all? Probably not. But the thing is I don't think that we have, I'd say that percentage is small, that anybody's pushing that agenda as a teacher here in Summertown, because we still live in the Bible Belt. People are typically morally sound. And they just, in their own conscience, can't sit there and say, I can't read this book about how you should be a homosexual if you feel that way. Any teachers object to that? Do you think there's any teachers here that, and I truly believe that. Do I think across our country that's different? 100%. Okay. Do you think that's rampant, or do you think that's one or two teachers that are pushing an agenda? Okay. And I would understand that, and I would say that there are places, even within Tennessee, where there's going to be more people trying to push an agenda because of the way they feel or family members that have that tendency, whatever. So I do agree, and I understand what I'm saying here, because we're kind of speaking the same thought here. If we don't start doing something about it, those few that are pushing an agenda will become more and more, especially in this next generation that comes up. Not interested, yes.
I'll give you an example. We just filled out a form for our 11-year-old, sixth grader. What's your sex, and what do you identify as? That's in Summertown.
Yes.
You know, and I mean, it's not our, it's been forced on us.
It's a federal,
That's a federal law.
yes.
But at some point, we've got to continue to fight against it, or we'll lose that battle.
Yeah. And honestly, it's not about taking those forms out. It's about talking to our kids, just what you said a minute ago. If we don't start as parents and grandparents talking to our kids about what's really they're going to be facing, and all of a sudden they go off to college, and they're getting influenced by so many people, and now they're not in our homes to talk about it anymore, we're going to wind up losing our kids and our grandkids. If we don't start, and if we don't give them the information they need on how to stand as a Christian against these things, we're going to wonder what's happening within our communities 10 years from now. And it really does. It falls back on us as the Lord's church on having the courage to do more. Tim, you were about to say something a minute ago. So, boy, there's so many things I want to talk about just on that statement. Let's just start with the media part of it. How much are you allowing into your house to influence your kids? Because honestly, the media is shoving it down our throat in a way that makes it tolerable, even to us as Christians. But what's actually happening is they just keep planting those seeds within our hearts, all of us. And now we've woken up and we're looking at it going, whoa, how did our country just get here? How did Summertown even get to this point? How do we have kids in this community changing their name because they identify as the opposite sex? How do we have people in our community just sitting here going, by the way, I'm homosexual, hey, high five everybody, and hey, good for you, and there's no shame any longer. Why? Because we allowed it into our house. We've never stopped. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. And it's not just homosexuality. There's all kind of evil that's coming into our house, and we're allowing it. And Tim, I've come to the conclusion, and so I agree with you. I don't know how the church becomes more unified as far as each one together to across our country. The churches of Christ become more unified to get it out. But honestly, it's one of those things I wish that we could all get on the same page as churches of Christ across our nation to say, how do we focus on our community? And if all churches of Christ would do that, and I understand, in the Southeast, it's going to be a lot easier because there's a lot of churches of Christ. When you get across different parts of our nations, there may not be a church of Christ for 100 miles. So it may not be quite as easy. But if we don't start with the communities that we live in, all of it, all churches of Christ, it's going to become a big deal within our country to where we can't stop it any longer. And then we'll only have a few in the church that are left conservative enough to believe what God said.
The last time I looked, Christianity right now is still the majority in the United States. 66%, and continues to decline year after year. Right now, they think it's going to be down to 35% within 50 years. Because the church is silent.
Yes.
We do nothing because we make the excuse that it's the world
You would never do that. Mom taught her that. Wow. I love it. Let's go back to that silent part. How many of y'all have seen the movie Braveheart? And I know it's actors, but there's a scene in there, and we've all seen probably this clip anyways, where Mel Gibson's riding on that horse, and he's talking to the army, and they're sitting there starting to leave. I said, well, why are you leaving? I'm not going to die for them. And he puts this challenge before them. He says, how many of y'all, 50 years from now, as you're laying there in bed and you know that you have no freedom whatsoever, will be drawn back to this point? And how many of you 50 years from now would look back and beg to be back on this battlefield to be able to fight for the freedom you wanted? And I sit there and I'm so fearful that that's the way we're going to feel 10 years from now. We're going to look back 10 years from now and say, you know, it's worth losing my job to make sure that the biblical principles still lived. It was worth being excluded for that period of time because look at how much stronger our community is. It was worth losing this relationship because look how much stronger the church is now. I'm so fearful, and honestly, I feel that way right now. If we could have gone back 20 years, how much would the Lord's church change in the communities? Because 20 years ago, what was the church here? Over 200 people? What happened? When you don't do anything, when you don't stand for anything, you just slowly die out. Because at the end of the day, who cares? What are we today as the Lord's church going to do to make sure that doesn't happen? And if we don't stand for something, we'll wonder why the church just dwindled away.
Although we don't agree with everything the Amish community does, obviously. However, most of them are not believing the Social Security number. Some of them. So they don't accept Social Security. My point is that group of people made a stand several years ago, and they're left alone to do what they do by the government.
Mm-hmm.
Because they made a stand, and they left them, they're peaceful people and so forth. But they gave up some things to follow what they believe. And I think there's some pretty good examples in that community of simplicity, and there's other things that obviously we went on before. But I just think as an example of people that have stood for something that went against the grain, the church hasn't been as good as of late to do that. That's all I'm speaking.
That's right. But that's where, honestly, decisions have to be made by us individually today to make a difference. And what are we going to do? Whether it's speaking to our kids, whether it's talking to people in the community, whatever it is, what are we truly going to choose to do today to wear the name of Christian?
Kind of compound what he just said, same thoughts too. How successful would the Amish that have been out in doing what they're doing, and they allow the government to educate the children? We look at it and send our kids, or we expect the government to take care of them, and the government educates. Yeah, we've got great teachers in certain places. There's also terrible teachers in other places. I mean, we're assuming that we can send them there and they're okay because they're in school. And it's, when I was in school in the 80s, they didn't do any of this stuff. My thoughts of school now, again, it's like summer camp, same situation. So we did summer camp last year. What was different experience for, Christian summer camp than it was when I went to Christian summer camp, 20 years ago. I mean, it's evolved so much. But we stopped educating our own children for some reason, which is a big part of it, and just letting other people do the educating. And one person got up for 8 hours a day. They come home and get on video games, watch TV the rest of the night. And we're tired, we're out working all day. So we made a sacrifice a long time ago, making it to where we needed more stuff, needed more money, because, I need more money, so mom needs to go to work. Okay, now daddy needs 2 jobs, mom needs 3 jobs. The kids, we better take care of our children, and we kind of see where we're at. I mean, the Church of Christ, yeah, we were, huge. But also we let everybody else educate our children.
We let everybody else in to our families.
Schools are now, like,
Yeah. Well, but you think back about universities who, 50, 100 years ago, associated with the Church of Christ, who now no longer have those ties at all across our nation. And that's true. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. So what do you think would happen in our country if everybody who wore the name Christian today cut off cable TV? You think that would change? What about if there was a commercial out there that if they had anybody who promoting homosexuality, I will never go back in your business again? What would happen? Would we change the country we live in? I agree. But we don't unify. And understand, I have to start with myself. I have to do this myself before I do anything else. But what if we started that voice to say, listen, we're just going to stay true to our beliefs. We're not going against anybody intentionally. We just want you to know that I don't feel comfortable with the belief that I have, that if you're going to promote this, then I'm not going to go with it. I'm not going to go back into your business ever again until you change who you are. I remember my dad, when these different commercials would come out and they would promote homosexuality, boy, he'd get on the phone, call the business office there saying, hey, I just need you to know if you continue this, I will not. And it was amazing how many times they'd say, I can't tell you how many calls we've received. But the thing is, because their business never declined, they never changed. And that's really what they were gauging it off of.
I was going to say, another thing we've got to be ready for, when we stand for the truth, whatever that may be, we're also to the world, we're going to be the sinners. Mm-hmm. And realize we're going to be the ones that are wrong and are basically sin. That we're going to turn it around on us. We've got to be ready for that too.
We do have to start building the idea within our kids. And it starts with ourselves. But if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. And that's really what the message they're getting and we're getting and we believe so much is if I take a stand, I'm the bad guy, just what you're saying. But if we don't, we fall for anything. We allow everything to happen. We've got to teach our kids to start having courage, but they've got to see it within us. What are you going to do? And the thing is, it's so much about the way we handle it, because I still have to be Christ-like in the stands that I make. I'm probably not going to go form a picket line outside of whatever company because they had a homosexual on TV. But if I can convince other people, hey, let's just all stay away from this company together to see if they change. And if anybody asks, don't say, hey, we were doing it to show you. We're doing it because my internal moral beliefs won't allow me to support you who are going this direction. So I'm not going to put my money there any longer. If you change, I'll be happy to give you my business back. But I can, in good conscience, continue to support you. And I think if we don't start doing that, we are going to find ourselves deeper, this country deeper and deeper and further away.
I think everybody in here at one time or another has shopped at Walmart. And I suspect everybody in here at one time said, I hate Walmart. Because of the way they treat their employees, or the way they treat social issues, or whatever. But they go right back. Don't go to Walmart.
We don't stand for anything.
Go to the school board meeting. You know, we got people trying to tell children to decide what their sex is, and these kids don't know whether they want to be Batman or Mutant Ninja Turtle.
What was the one, and I can't remember who the guy was, he said, I'm just glad that wasn't the idea back then, because really I wanted to be a pirate, so I had to cut my leg off and plucked an eye out, you know. So good thing we didn't go down that path back then. I will say I was very happy that the new Buzz Lightyear whatever movie that came out, it seemed to not get much attention, or people didn't follow. As soon as they saw that there was a homosexual scene, it just seemed to decline pretty quickly. And at least people made a stand. And I was thankful for that. But you're right. If we don't get that information out about certain things, and I understand, I'm not sure we can conquer it all, but if we don't do something, if we don't start someplace, what are we going to do? They see us taking a stand. They see us doing something, and we're losing when we don't do anything.
Say he used to get up every morning and watch the NFL Network. They started playing a commercial, like every commercial. Football is gay, football is homo. And I just turned it off. And I have stopped watching. Now NFL season is here. And I will probably watch a football game today. But if they play that commercial, I'm done. It's
Yes.
because I feel like they are pushing that. It's almost like Nazi propaganda.
Yes.
Is what it feels like to me, because it's constant.
And it changes who we are because we've seen it so much. I no longer have that heart of, I can't believe they would do it. The next time, they shouldn't do it. A little bit less, and all of a sudden, that's okay.
And it's one of those things, I don't want to be mean to those people.
Of course.
They're human beings.
That's right.
But they can't accept themselves.
Yeah.
And that's why they're pushing it to try to force us to accept it.
Yeah.
So they feel better about it.
That's right. And that's something we have to do. Again, make sure we're starting with ourselves. Yes, sir.
There's a couple of publications here in Alamo, there was recently
I'm telling you, I don't think that's a bad thing, or at least eliminate the channels that are promoting certain things. Because it may not be the cable company themselves, but it is certain channels that we should never go back to. And if we don't start, we'll lose out. Thank y'all.